Okay, my name is Arun, and thank you, Ken, for the kind introduction. I'm relatively new to the Seattle area, and I'll be doing my best to keep our conversation animated and stimulating. So I'm going to start with a little bit of context. In 1966, the economist Alfred Kahn wrote a widely acknowledged article called The Tyranny of Small Decisions. It's subtitled Market Failures, Imperfections, and the Limits of Economics. You can look it up. It's a very detailed write-up. And rather than get into the mechanics of the paper, I want to do two simple quotes or draw your attention to them. The first is a market economy makes its major allocation decisions on the basis of a host of smaller decisions, smaller both in size and in scale, and scope rather, and in the amount of the resources they affect and the period of time they cover. He goes on to say, a critical task in appraising the allocative efficiency of such an economy is then to determine whether and under what conditions the total effect of these small decisions will be optimal. Now, if you wanted to sort of just say, okay, how do you make sense of this? I would put it this way. A host of perfectly well-considered small decisions made as priorities within an agency may cumulatively not add up to a larger synergy. Now, let me back off of that a bit and provide some different context. In 1921, the Federal Highway Administration announced it was providing $52.2 billion in funding for all 50 states under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Of this amount, Washington is set to receive over $2.8 billion and Oregon $1.6 billion for roads, bridges, and related public mobility projects. Such investments in the public Northwest infrastructure are expected to focus on a range of particular sectors, which is what the Act allocates, and that includes transportation, energy, water and wastewater, telecommunications, and related social infrastructure. Now, transportation and related improvement projects across such a wide range of sectors runs the risk, as you all might guess, of being piecemeal and agency priority driven across different timelines. So the degree of urgency or the ability to mobilize the use of such funding varies dramatically. And yet we all know that there are larger gains to be had from interagency and mobility system coordination across all these modes. And as a practical matter, we also know that there will never be enough money and resources to do all that we want to do or indeed need to do. So the larger question before the panel today is, are larger interagency synergies even possible? And I'm going to ask my three colleagues here to probe those opportunities and daylight some of those barriers according to their perspective and their considerable personal experience. So in order, we have Anthony Buckley. He's the Director of Innovative Partnerships in Washington State Department of Transportation. Paul Wirths, a state hydraulic engineer, Oregon's Department of Transportation, and Tom Hinson, Director of Everett Transit. And you'll see they're all covering different aspects of a system-level set of considerations. So we'll have a few minutes. Everyone's going to get about 9 minutes. We'll have a few minutes at the end for a brief roundtable discussion. And as Ken mentioned, even though there isn't going to be time for audience Q&A, we'll invite you in the lobby to get to any of them. I'm going to start by posing two questions to each panelist who's been made aware of them in advance. Please introduce yourselves and note that both questions and your introduction need to work within 9 minutes. Can't really see the clock up here, but I'm hoping somebody will tell us when there's 1 minute left for each speaker. I'm going to start with Anthony. So, Anthony, if you will, Washington State has a wide number of deferred maintenance projects, but it also has growth-related expansion needs. How is WashDOT deciding what they are, and what kinds of economic development issues are a consideration? How will WashDOT balance the needs for public transit over roads and bridges? And the second question, and you can answer them in any way you like, do the funds available allow for future-oriented investments? Paul. Sorry, Anthony.
So thank you, Aaron. Good morning. Again, I'm Anthony Buckley, and I work with WashDOT as Director of Innovative Partnerships. So I'm going to caveat my comments by first saying I'm a finance guy. So when I look at these questions, it's about how do we pay for these, where do we find the resources necessary to fund these projects. Funding and financing are two different exercises. So when you ask about the resources and the priorities, right now within Washington State, we have a huge, with our transportation system, we have a large or a huge deferred maintenance portfolio. So our focus there is really on preservation and safety. Our policies, policy goals are outlined in the state statute, but primary amongst those are those with a focus on preservation and safety. So trying to maintain what we have in a state of good repair. So that's really where a lot of our dollars get focused. Under that are stewardship, mobility, and economic vitality. Economic vitality is one of my favorite areas. So really it has to fit that prioritization. I can talk to you about building capacity, but that's not really where the department's focused. We could build our way out of the problem, but then that just means we're creating a problem for 20 years in the future. Our Secretary Millar, is famous for pinpointing and putting up a slide that shows us building extra lanes, and they're just as congested the day after they open. I think the investment is somewhere in the neighborhood of close to $500 billion, and that may be grossly overstated, to build new capacity that's just going to get eaten up. So I hope I addressed your first question, and going to try and remind myself of your second question here, because I have a short memory. That's 450 lane miles would be necessary to build out our congestion at $115 billion. You talk about future-oriented investments that is the department considering. Right now, there's a very important exercise that just started. I've been with WashDOT for 8 years, running public-private partnerships office, and we were successful. Let me back up for a second. The state of Washington was, with regard to public-private partnerships, it has been an academic exercise since the late 90s. Now, if you're not aware of what a public-private partnership truly is, it's the partnership between the public and private sector. We've morphed it into public, nonprofit, and others, but it's really a risk-sharing partnership where you can accelerate the delivery of a project using private equity combined with public financing, bring innovation and faster delivery of certain projects. It's not appropriate in all cases, so please don't leave this room and let my boss hear that I said public-private partnerships will solve everything. They are not the solution for everything, but they are a great resource for innovation and risk sharing and acceleration of delivery. Now, why I bring that up in the context of funding or future-oriented investments is because there's a lot of money on the private side looking for projects. We're bogged down in regulations that challenge us in accessing those financial resources on the other side. Public-private partnerships in the United States is about, I want to say, 30 years old now. We're still way behind the curve. We're still struggling to really come up with standardized contract formatting across the nation. We have 37 states who have enabling legislation that allow them to consider public-private partnership. Of those 37, there aren't very many that really actually do them, and Washington is one. Now, that very important exercise that's being undertaken today, the Joint Transportation Committee is leading a work group to study our existing statutes, identify all of the challenges in those statutes, governing public-private partnerships, and coming back in the next legislative session with new benchmarked statutory recommendations that would improve our ability to consider the use of public-private partnerships. So back to finance. Public-private partnerships allows us to tap into the private equity markets. It allows us to tap into foreign direct investment, which have expressed interest in investing in the Pacific Northwest in ultra-high-speed rail, in Columbia River Bridge or the I-5 bridge today. But we're considering all of our options, and then it becomes a political conversation, becomes a public conversation of acceptability. So hopefully that answered that.
I think we have a minute or two left, so let me ask you a follow-up question. You mentioned public-private partnerships as an immense resource to cover a lot of the gaps on the urgencies. However, as you know, there's structural sort of facilitators that need to happen for public-private partnerships to work. There are also timing issues and process issues. So in a short amount of time, can you share with us some of those struggles and what needs to be overcome for PPP to work?
So when you say timing and resource issues, are you talking about on the project side, or are you talking about on just getting to?
Even just getting there.
It's really the politics. If you look at the optimally run, which I would tell you there's no optimally run public-private partnership program in the world. There are really good ones. Australia comes to mind, which is really the pioneers in public-private partnerships. The challenge in the U.S. is politics. It's, we've got we've always had this political divide, and there's a jockeying for control, and there's exercising of power. We've had many projects in this country. We had a project right here. Tacoma Narrows Bridge was going to be the first public-private partnership in this area. And I always referred in these talks to T&B as being, the proverbial bride and groom get to the altar and the bride runs away. We got to the 11th hour, and the legislature said, nope, we're not doing this. So it's political, but there's also, you have to invest in the due diligence to understand and educate the public. So we in the public-private partnership industry have really gotten the public to understand we're not privatizing assets. We still own, as the government, we still own the asset. And that was a big fear. So it's politics, education, and getting over the fear.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. There might be some follow-up questions towards the end. Paul, would you introduce yourself and address the following two questions? How does state funding augmented by federal funding help your efforts to local improvement programs like bridge, pavement, culverts, fish passage, and upgrades like that? And what is the size of the local problem compared to the combined resources you have at your disposal? And the follow-up to that would be, what would streamline such projects?
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Paul Werfs. I am the state hydraulic engineer for the Oregon Department of Transportation. My passion is in some of the topics we'll be talking about later today, so I might be having some questions for the other panel members when we talk about stormwater and hydraulics and things like that. But in my current role, I also look at, and I'm responsible for the system-wide approach for culvert funding and some new funding sources that came from the Transportation Act. And I'll be talking about that a little bit. So, the federal funding and the state funding, it really is a partnership. We must always be thinking about the fact that when you say, oh, there's federal funding, it's like, well, typically that doesn't come for free. So federal funding comes with a long list of strings attached, especially when you're looking at matching funds. So typically a federally funded transportation project requires 20% local or state matching funds. And if you don't have those funds available in your project budgets or your program budgets, you actually cannot access those federal funds. I know that the state of Oregon actually has a challenge in that in some areas. And so, for example, there are some recent grant opportunities, and we strategically did not pursue as many as we actually had good projects because we didn't have enough state funds available. So, you know, talking about how you pursue those projects is really important. The recent IIJA Transportation Act includes a new program called the Protect Program, and I'm our agency program funding manager for that as well. And what's interesting about that is there's actually opportunities in that portion of the Transportation Act that allows you to reduce the matching requirements. So if you have an approved resiliency improvement plan approved by Federal Highways, and it's in your transportation plan for your municipality or agency, you can actually get the match reduced down to 10%. Well, for a $10 million project, that's $1 million that you just saved. So looking for those opportunities is really important, understanding what the requirements are in pursuing those projects. Now, there are formula funds, which, and in the state of Oregon, most of those are going towards DOT projects, but there's also all the grant opportunities are coming out there. And what we have learned is that partnering with local agencies, partnering with regulatory agencies, partnering with the tribes can help you pursue some of those grant opportunities. It makes it a much stronger argument to Federal Highways to say, look, we're all in agreement, this is a great project. It also leverages other reduced match opportunities. For example, if you have a project that's on tribal lands, there's no match requirement. So if you have a local agency or a state project that's in tribal lands and you can develop that partnership, there's a wonderful opportunity. We actually, ODOT, actually partnered with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife on a variety of fish passage grants opportunities, which if you read the announcement that came out a couple of weeks ago about which projects were awarded in the state of Oregon, the headline read, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife provided grants. Well, those are all ODOT projects, which we partner with them. We're more than happy to let them get the headlines because it's a project that will be getting funded at a 90% federal because we have an approved resiliency improvement plan. Those projects were in there, and now we're helping the transportation infrastructure, and we're also helping the fisheries and fish passage barriers within the state. Another little element about the Protect program in the IIJA that has these reduced match opportunities is it's actually a different way of thinking about how we spend our transportation money, because historically program managers at the state and the federal level, we're primarily looking at, it's either capacity enhancement or it's going to be what we call fix it, fixing the infrastructure that's crumbling beneath us as we are going through. And the Protect program actually has a different focus, where it's talking about resiliency, equity, innovation, natural-based solutions. I'm not going to get into the details of what all that means, but if you want to know more about that, talk to me afterwards. I think there's some really interesting things that we can be talking about there. So now let's talk about what's the size of the problem. And I have, we all understand that bridges and pavements, that's nationally, everyone knows that we have bridges and pavement information, and we have funding that goes towards those. There's also culverts. There's a whole variety of other assets we're all interested in. There's traffic signals. There's ITS systems, barriers. Landslides and rock falls is a risk area that we also inventory. But I'm going to talk about culverts because that's what I know, and I can share with you some really fun facts about how big is the problem and how much funding do we have. One of the things in the state of Oregon is what we realize is you actually need to have the data to be able to answer that question. So how many people know how many culverts they have? Nobody? I will guarantee you. Well, okay, we have one. Okay, but I'll share you ODOT's experience. We have not as many highways as in Washington, but we have established an inspection protocol and inspected 50% of our highways. And from that information, we're able to realize that 30% of our culverts are in poor or critical condition. We actually experience 8 culvert failures per year. That's not just, no, that's like closing the road. That's not good. Yeah. If you were to have 8 bridges fail, I think that would be on the cover of the newspaper. But our maintenance crews do a wonderful job keeping the roads open. So that's part of a problem, but now put it in the context. Our highways across the Pacific Northwest, you know, we have the wonderful interstate system. Those are actually our newest highways typically, and they were built in the 60s. Culverts are only designed to last 50 to 75 years. Do the math. They're all ready to expire. Those are the new highways. So just think about if, in summary, at our current funding levels in the state of Oregon, we have enough money set aside to replace our bridges and culverts every 1,000 years.
Thank you, Paul. If you can answer this question in a minute, what would streamline these projects or your efforts to just have effective system surveillance, if you will, or monitoring? Are there some quick suggestions or wishes?
Streamlining is of the culvert inspection or in the inspections is actually really difficult for the types of infrastructure that you cannot do digitally. You know, we do have, you know, digital inventories across the highways, and so if you have assets that are like barriers, and there's a lot of things you can do with the new drones and with driving LiDAR, which we have statewide. But there are challenges with there's something underneath the road. It's hard to inventory piping systems and things. So, but if you have assets that are above the ground, using the newest technologies is an efficient way.
Thank you, Paul. Tom, you're in the unique position on this panel of running a small town transit agency. And from that perspective, given that we're all talking about the broader systems here, here's 2 questions for you. Small agencies like Everett Transit run the risk of being shortchanged in their allocations for infrastructure funding. How does Everett plan to ensure its fair share, and what must be done to streamline state and local transit investment coordination? And the follow-up question would be, what is your big view of how Everett fits in the statewide transportation system vis-a-vis the funding opportunities?
Adjust my seat here so I can see you all. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Arun. For those of you who are not familiar with this area, the city of Everett is a city of about 110,000 people, about 30 miles north in the Snohomish County. We think of ourselves as the gateway to the beautiful Cascade Mountains or the gateway to the Seattle metropolitan area. On a good day, it's a 35-minute trip. Today was a 35-minute trip on the bus. It was great. Other days, not so great, maybe 90 minutes or more. But uniquely, the city of Everett has its own bus system called Everett Transit. And it's been my privilege to be the director there for 17 years. I started out in this industry as a part-time bus driver at King County Metro with a stop right over here at 6th and Terry as the beginning of my run 40 years ago. And if you want to figure out how I got from there to director of Everett Transit, I'll meet you out in the hall and we can talk about it. But I will say that I have had a very satisfying career in this last 40 years and seen a lot of change. And I've been able to do it all from right here, which is kind of rare in our industry. So I'm very thankful for that. And I'm very thankful for the people who helped me get to that. And I always look for an opportunity to share the grace and the encouragement that I've received through the many years. So the first question, I'll repeat it. The small transit systems like Everett Transit run the risk of being shortchanged in the allocations of infrastructure funding, and how does Everett Transit plan to ensure its fair share, and what must be done to streamline state and local transit investment coordination? Well, it's kind of a loaded question because fair share seems to be in the eye of the beholder. If you're a large transit system and you're carrying the weight of cost of buses and trains and infrastructure, and you are carrying more people than anybody else, you rightfully think, I should get the largest share because I'm doing the most work, I'm taking more people off the road, we should get the biggest piece. And that's probably true. But if you're a small system like Everett Transit, and you don't have the commuter market, and you don't have funding sources that are dedicated towards those who have large commuter markets, and you look at your cost per hour and you think it costs us just as much to do this work, the work that we do, we should get more, we should get a bigger slice just to keep up. But we have been fairly successful in Everett Transit in getting our, I guess, fair share, mostly through state support and some federal grants as well, largely for bus replacements and bus expansions. But most recently, the Move Ahead Washington program has created some additional grant funding opportunities, and the Green Transportation Grant, the Bus and Bus Facilities Grant, and the unprecedented Youth Transit, I'll say it again, Free Youth Transit Pass, which essentially is an agreement with the transit agencies in the state of Washington. If kids 18 and under can ride free on your system, we will guarantee you a slice of a very big pie. And it's been financially good for pretty much everybody except the very largest agencies who probably did not recover quite as much percentage-wise. Everett Transit has been very successful in the last 10 years or so. Between 2009 and 2017, we were able to secure $11.4 million from various state grants, largely the Regional Mobility Grant program that existed at the time. And we were able to partner with Community Transit in Snohomish County to build Swift Bus Rapid Transit, which is a partnership between Community Transit and Everett Transit. And the state helped fund that. We were able to get 4 additional BRT stations out of their money. We had a signal priority project on our busiest arterial. We did a bus stop and pedestrian safety project on a different arterial, and we were able to purchase 3 electric buses. So that was very good. We were early recipient of the Green Transportation Grant, which gave us $1.9 million to build inductive charging stations. Everybody knows what I mean when I say inductive charging stations? Very simply, it's the concept that a vehicle parks over some plates, and while the driver is taking a break, the bus is charging. And so we are working on that project, which would allow our electric buses to be as efficient as a diesel bus, because we can charge it out in the field and not have to bring it back into the yard after 8 or 10 hours of service and then have to have it recharged. So we're very excited about getting that system completely in place. And then most recently, we were very fortunate to get another $11.5 million to buy 9 additional replacement electric buses for our fleet. So back to the question, what is Everett doing to get its fair share? I think for us, it has been aligning our policies, our vision with the funders' policies and vision, which has been for cleaner, more fuel efficient, environmentally friendly operations. And Everett Transit's goal is to be completely electrified in our fixed route fleet by 2028. Now the risk and what we would like to see improved is basically a 2-year agreement. When you get money from the state, it's a 2-year agreement, and some of these projects cannot be completed in 2 years. If I order a bus today, I might get it in 18 months, and I risk not getting it for 2 years. And so when that clock starts ticking, then we have to go back to the legislature. We have to ask for that money to be reapproved, and you always risk that. And understand that you can't obligate tomorrow's legislature with today's legislature decisions, but it is a real risk. And so we always have to keep big reserves just in case we don't get that money. So we will continue to seek funding from every possible source, and I'll give you a couple of creative solutions that we've come up with. The last 10 buses that we purchased were purchased with a combination of federal grants and a grant from the Department of Ecology. The Volkswagen mitigation money provided our match for that. So essentially, those 10 buses didn't cost us anything this time around. They'll cost us more money the next time around. And the most creative one is that Snohomish County PUD, our Public Utility District, said we have an idea for a grant with the Department of Commerce. And what would you think we could do together? And we said, well, we need an inductive charging station at this new park that's being built by a developer as part of their mitigation to the city of Everett for a new housing development. And so we partnered with them, and we will be installing the first inductive charging system in this region next spring. Okay, our next question, or should we do faster?
Yeah, I think I'll fold that into our
Okay.
shared discussion.
Sure.
Just in the interest of time. Thank you all. I think there's a lot to tease apart in what everyone has said, but I'm going to highlight a couple of things. So Anthony talked about public-private partnerships as a very sort of unique opportunity, but there's obviously challenges in pulling that off, including political will. And Paul talked about the protection program, which is designed to reduce the amount of matching funds. And Tom talked about aligning policies and visions with the funders' policy and visions, but also creative funding. So I'm going to throw this question out to all three of you. With all the current priorities, what future-oriented investments are your agencies considering that would benefit from wider interagency and state collaborations? So for the two gentlemen from their respective states, I would say, how would you respond to the local agencies further down the pipeline? And for Tom, it would be the opposite direction.
I can go first because I can actually hit on a couple of Tom's talking points. And I am responsible for the EV infrastructure build out in the state and that 2-year window of funding you talked about. Our priorities are given to us by the legislature. So we're constantly working to work with the legislature to help them understand project owners' needs on funding and have to avoid that reappropriation. But then on the other hand, we're working with project owners to help them understand the reappropriation process, get the money obligated, and we have a better chance of securing the money in the next biennium for you. So, you know, there's that misalignment because you're right, we can't obligate the next legislature to what we're doing today, but there are ways for us to help you both of us to partner up and overcome that. So we're always trying to close those gaps in understanding. And I think the pandemic gave us some of our greatest learning lessons on what project owners in the construction industry, what, the human resource industry is dealing with, because we've had to go back time and time again and explain to the legislature on the federal funding, that the feds were not dragging their feet, they were taking their time and rolling out the National Electric Vehicle Program. It's not up to us to spend the money, it's up to the feds to tell us when we can spend the money. On the local side, when the legislature gives us $25 million and their expectation is we're going to spend it in 2 years, well, then we've kind of got to put the pressure on our local communities, got to spend this, my message is always, spend as much as you can, as fast as you can, within reason, but make sure you get the full amount obligated, because I can make a better case for securing the funds for you.
So let me just expand on that a bit. Excuse me. You talked about spend the money allocated as quickly as possible. But as a practical matter, we know that there's councils, there's commissions, there's the public, there's a whole bunch of an approvals process or process, let's say, of some sort or another, that sort of gets in the way. How would you sort of reconcile those two pushes and pulls?
That's a real challenge, because then on my side of the fence, most of what we grant out is through a competitive process. So we're looking for those projects that are ready. So if you haven't gone through all the approvals at the local municipal level, you're not likely to score very well against those, better packaged projects. And I think that is a challenge, because we, as a state or as a state agency, so, and specific to my program, because it's so new, we're learning, and we have to do a better job at announcing and releasing, being more predictable, so that I think that will help inform on the local side when they need to get those approvals.
Tom, do you want to push back on that a little, or and dwell on it a little bit from the perspective of your particular challenges of how you would orchestrate that?
I agree with everything Anthony said. You can plan. What you can't account for is the change in the market. For instance, our biggest holdup in inductive charging right now is not state money or our ability to do anything. It is the ability to get that last piece, which is the switch gear, which is rare as hen's teeth. So it just, every time we ask, it's delayed further and further. And so that's what happens. We get a project that we know we can do in 2 years, and then there'll be something that's completely out of our control. And thankfully, the state has been very helpful in helping us adjust those things and understanding, but it's always a risk.
Paul, do you want to weigh in?
A slightly different tact. What I've observed through the most recent grant process through federal highways, through the IIJA, not necessarily through the grant, through the PROTECT program, but through the aquatic organization, or aquatic organ, or AOCs, APC. So it's fish passage, is what they call it. Is a lot of good projects actually were not funded because they weren't well developed. And so you need to make sure that whenever you're partnering and you're putting your time and effort into developing these grant applications, that it's not just a concept. It needs to have already, you need to have already invested some scoping and some planning effort into those, or you need to be asking, you need to be right-sizing your asks. Maybe you should be asking for planning money instead of construction money. That's okay, because then you will be building on the justification for the next application cycle. And that's the thing with the new IIJA opportunities. This isn't a one-time thing. The plan is there's going to be multiple asks. So every year, every 2 years, there's going to be more asks. So you can, again, start building those partnerships now, and if you're not in for this cycle, start preparing for the next cycle.
That's a very important point, Paul, because I think a lot of this process doesn't allow agencies at any level in the totem pole to dream or to imagine. If they haven't planned it, if they haven't had the confidence to look at their strategic plans or their future must-do list or could-do list, funding doesn't seem to support a lot of that fundamental let's think it differently let's coordinate differently, let's do it differently. So it's clear that although we can't really do justice to all these issues in 40 minutes, I hope you, the audience, have got a better sense of what the potential problems and rubs and synergies can be, and the collective gains from these kinds of collaborations. And so I'll end where we started, which is that although each agency's priorities are not small decisions unto themselves, I'm sure you'll agree that there are greater gains to be had from cross-disciplinary and geographic collaborations. Please give our panelists a good round of appreciation, and thank you all.